So today on Sunday, we normally do stories, Chassidic stories. So the first story is a story of a Stoliner Chassid from the Stoliner Chassidim. And the Stoliner Chassidim, they have an interesting tradition. They daven very loud. And that's their tradition, that in their shul, they have a special minhag, a special custom to say every word out loud, and very different, I would say, than the typical Ashkenazic shul, because in most Ashkenazic synagogues, the davening is pretty quiet. Sephardic shuls, half out loud, half quiet, and Stolin, it's all loud. They say the whole thing out loud. And so this Stoliner Chassid was on vacation or traveling, and he came to a community for Shabbos. He was staying at the rabbi's house, and he, was telling the rabbi that, I'm a Stoliner Chassid. He was invited into, to stay at the rabbi's house. During the meal, he explained, he's what type of Chassidim he's from. He's a Stoliner Chassid. He mentioned, that tomorrow, during the davening, he does, his custom is to say every word out loud, and he hopes that's okay. So the rabbi of the synagogue, who he was eating at, he says, absolutely not. Do not try to say every word out loud. You're going to interrupt all the other people. It's going to be, people aren't used to that, and it's going to ruin the concentration of the other community members. So you gotta try to fit in over here. If you want to daven in shul tomorrow, make sure to not make any waves, and daven regular like everyone else. So he said, okay, definitely, I'll try to keep my personal custom, keep it in the closet, and at least and follow the minhag hamakim, the custom of the place. So he tried all he could the next day, but of course, when it came to certain parts of the davening, his excitement, he was davening with such intensity that his excitement, it sort of made him lose himself and forget where he was. He started saying things out loud, pretty loud. He was doing Baruch Shamar very loud, and Ashrei, and Oz Yashir, and Nishmas. And, he started saying certain parts, the Shema, certain parts of the davening, he started saying like quite loud. Anyway, so he started getting nervous, because afterwards he realized, they're really going to be fed up with me. I'm probably going to be getting thrown out of here. So he waited till the end of the davening, even though, it might have been smarter for him to leave early, but he waited for the end. And he was expecting people at least to say something negative to him. At the end, they all complimented him, how beautiful. It was so nice to see someone with such intense concentration on their davening. So they complimented him greatly, and the rabbi also. So afterwards, the Stolner Chassid, he was a little shocked. He was very surprised. How could it be? He knows that this is not their tradition. How could it be that they thought so positive about his davening out loud, when he knows it's really against their tradition, and it's something they're not used to, and it probably ruined their concentration and so on. And so he asked the rabbi. He said, "Well, what happened? Why did people compliment me? I mean, I did try, but I understand. I sort of failed. So why did they compliment me?" So the rabbi said, well, initially, when you were going to say all the words out loud, it was going to just be your mind. In your mind, you wanted to say them out loud because that's your tradition. And for the people here, that would have been making a lot of noise. It would have been just, messing up the decorum of the synagogue. And it would have just been a noisy synagogue. But when you were engrossed in your prayers and you had such intensity and it came from your heart, we saw it as music to the soul. It was so meaningful. It was not just you screaming the words of the prayers, but it came straight from your heart, and we saw that, and it actually inspired us. So that was that's really the end of the story. But what do we see from this story? This story is very connected to Lag BaOmer, because on Lag BaOmer, the special holiday that we just celebrated on Thursday night and Friday, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it says he reached the highest levels on the day of his passing. And he reached such great spiritual levels that it was time for him to graduate to the next world, and he passed away on Lag BaOmer. But he requested that everyone should celebrate on his special day. And he mentions how he was connected to Hashem so openly, so strong. So it was such a strong connection to Hashem that he had on the last day of his passing. And one of the questions that is asked is, how could it be that his connection was so strong on the last day? It was like he was like connected, attached to Hashem. We know all his life he was attached to Hashem. And it wasn't just on his last day. So what was the difference, the attachment that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had all the days of his life, his attachment to Hashem, and the attachment he had on the last day? We know that throughout his life, Hashem loved him and never wanted to destroy the world in his whole lifetime. And therefore, there was never a rainbow. When Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived, in his whole generation, there was never a rainbow that was seen, because God never wanted to destroy the world, never had a thought to destroy the world in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's days, because he loved so much Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's service that he never had a moment of thought to destroy the world, or maybe because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's merits atoned for any sin in the world, and therefore there was no reason, no thought for God to destroy the world, because it was like there were no sins in the world. And so the question is, so what was the difference between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's connection to Hashem throughout his life and his connection to Hashem on the last day, on the day of his passing? And so one of the explanations is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was attached to Hashem during his life like ink is attached to parchment. On the last day of his life, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was attached to Hashem like a stone is engraved, like the tablets were engraved. You see, when ink is attached to parchment, it's attached. It's not it's not separated, but it could. It's not fully attached. It's not one. It's attached. It's two entities that are attached. But when something's engraved, that is one entity. The words and the parchment are one. The stone, the words and the stone, I should say, are one. And that's the attachment of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on the day of his passing. And so, of course, all his life he was totally one with Hashem, but he reached even a deeper level of that on his day of passing. And the same thing is this Chassid who was davening with such intensity that when he was just going to say the words out loud, it showed a certain connection to Hashem, but it didn't show the full intensity of it. It didn't show that it was coming from the heart. It was attached, it was attached to his prayers. But when he controlled himself to daven out loud. He davened quietly. He controlled himself from davening so loud, and he davened quietly. And only at certain points he lost himself, and his feelings overwhelmed him, and he said those prayers out loud. The people realized that this was really coming from the heart. It was the essence of who he was. He was so attached to it, and because of that, they respected it and were inspired by it. So that's the story and connection to Lag BaOmer. So how do we learn? What do we learn from this story? Anyone want to share any thoughts?
Well, it's okay to be expressive about your Judaism and emotional,
Great. So expressive and emotional. That's and prayer is all about the bringing out our emotional feelings of Hashem. So even though we say, it's a lot of there are so many words that we repeat every time, every prayer, but we're supposed to try to dig deeper into ourselves and bring out our feelings to Hashem. Thinking about Hashem before the prayers is always a great preparation for powerful prayers. If you think about Hashem, think about connection to Hashem, the kindnesses of Hashem, the greatness of Hashem. And then to daven, it enhances your prayers. In fact, the Mishnah says, "Ein oimdim lehispalel ela mitoich koved roish." Person shouldn't just jump into the prayers. You're supposed to set up your mind, meditate, set your mind up ready for the prayers, and that's in order to be able to reach the level that this Stolen Chassid reached during his prayers, that he felt that strong, intense connection and feeling to Hashem. Okay, any other thoughts?
Rabbi,
yeah.
When I was 13 years old, I belonged to UJA, not UJA, USY, United Synagogue Youth. It's a conservative. Anyway, as a field trip, they took us into New York to see some, authentic Jewish everything. So one of the places they took us to was a Friday night, and they took us to, I don't know if it was stolen, but these guys were doing not somersaults, they were doing cartwheels up and down the aisles. Not everybody, but like the guys that were able to. And they were Chassidic guys, it was like a whole Chassidic shtiebel. And they were doing cartwheels. I never saw such a thing before. Yeah. What cartwheels are, they were like, flipping themselves in the middle of the aisles, back and forth in the aisles while they were davening.
That's so interesting.
I'm not sure. So it was somewhere in New York. I don't know whether it was East Side or I don't know where it was. I was 13, and I just thought, wow, they're really davening to Hashem with every bone.
That's so interesting. I don't know the Stoliner Chassidim so well, although I do have a friend who was a Stoliner Chassid, but I never knew about the cartwheels. I have to find out if that's if that's the common tradition in Stalin. Really very interesting. Very interesting. Yes, Andrea.
Thank you. There are other religions where they get into such a fervor. Whirling dervishes, they get into an enrapturement in a sense, and they twirl. I mean, it's part of how they express themselves. I don't know. I think they're. I want to say Turkish, but I wouldn't swear to it. But that Mediterranean Mideast area, and I have to look it up, but. That was, something that caught my imagination at one point in time too. that they were so taken away. That's well, that was encouraged as well. But the same idea, I would think.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, interesting. I know that that there was um, a major similarity over there between other, other. Did you say other religions that are
I think it is a religion. It's a religion. Yeah. I don't. It may be another name of it, but I guess the generic or the vernacular was whirling dervishes. No one else ever heard of that?
Yes.
Anyway, I do know that I mean, a lot of our traditions have been taken from, by other religions. So I don't, not surprising, I guess, either way. That if they if they did take that, I see it as a very Chassidic way of serving Hashem. You know what I mean? It's unique in the Chassidic world. The intensity is such prayers. But I do want to mention one other thing, and that is that I think this story and connecting it with Lag BaOmer, I think it brings out an interesting message about how Judaism should be seen in a way of being one with us. In other words, even though Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, of course, was on a very high level, and especially on the day of his passing, but the fact that the story is repeated to us, it means that we can attain some type of connection with that level, and that is that sometimes you have to put your foot down, and there's some things that are negotiable and some things that aren't. And a lot of times when something's negotiable, then others will take advantage of you, and they'll convince you to do things the way, different than you would really have wanted. But when you put your foot down, certain things become automatic. There's no question. There's no option. And that's the way Yiddishkeit is supposed to be. That it should be similar to the way Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had it. That's not an option. That there is areas where there's negotiation and different in areas, things that are permissible, and different customs and opportunities. But when it comes to Jewish law, that's not even an option, and that's where you have to put your foot down. And when you do that, all of a sudden, all the obstacles fall away, and no one tries to convince you otherwise, because you've set the stage exactly the way it's supposed to be, and people realize they're not going to budge you, so they just stay off. And that's the message from this lesson. This is an insight. This second part is an insight from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about Lag BaOmer and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and this is the message that how important it is to that Yiddishkeit should be automatic. It should be solid. It shouldn't be area of negotiation. Yes, Robert.
In my reading, and I think there was a sort of a tradition in Orthodox Judaism to be very stern, to be very serious. And then with the coming of the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidic, there was the joyousness of being Jewish that wasn't experienced prior to it. And so, so there's a continuum of the joyousness of being a Chassid, of what Judaism means within the Chassidic movement. So that's from my reading, that it happened. I don't know when it did, but again, it was from the Baal Shem Tov, when there was, again, the joy of being Jewish and expressing it. It didn't have to be a stern, solemn kind of a relationship between you and God. and in celebration with your fellow Jews.
Well said, Robert. Very, very true. I don't know that it never was part of the, before. In other words, Judaism was quite exciting, and people were very involved and very intense and happy about it. But there was a era where it sort of like died out, and
Right.
many of the and the reason why it died out was from all of the pogroms, and many of the children were brought up without parents, without a father, without a teacher, and so there was a lot of there were a lot of ignoramuses that they were uneducated. A lot of uneducated Jews. So they were fulfilling the commandments there was no excitement because they didn't know anything, and the teachers the rabbis were not humbling themselves enough to teach the people that wanted to learn. They just looked down at them. And so there was an era where things were going really downhill, and that's what you're referring to specifically.
Right,
The Chassidim came around.
Right, part of the discussion was what's the term mignagdim. Right, again, so
Right.
on that continuum of, again, Stoic, whatever, versus, again, how joyous it is to be a Jew, and that's part of the celebration of davening, the best I can say.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? Okay. So the next story is a story. A few stories. The next few stories are stories about rebuking people with the potential of embarrassing them. And we do get into areas of controversial areas, so I'm sure some of the stories aren't going to be the most comfortable for you, but just sharing with you some of the stories, and feel free to voice your thoughts. The first story is a story of a Chassidic Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe of Kabrin. And he had at his table many guests. And one of the guests, he said, I don't recognize this person. So he told his shamish, his helper, his aide, or gabbai. Gabbai is like the caretaker. He told the gabbai, he says, "Who is that guy?" So the gabbai said, "That guy, you know that person. He comes here often, and he's so and so's son, a certain chassid, a famous follower's son." He said, I don't know. And then finally afterwards, he said, "Oh yeah, okay. Now I can see. Now I see who it is." And so the Rebbe called across the table. This Reb Moshe of Kabrin, this Hasidic Rebbe, he called across the table and he said, I didn't recognize you. You know why? Because the mind of a person is where he is. In other words, what you're thinking about, that's really where you are. And what I saw before me was not the face of a man, but I saw a piece of meat. And what he meant was you were just thinking about the meal, and your mind was so involved in the meal that I didn't even see who you were. I saw a piece of meat. I saw it looked like a steak or something in front of me. And he basically was rebuking him that you really should concentrate, this is a Shabbos meal. It's not about the food, although we have delicious food, but it's all about, the Shabbos experience. And so this Rebbe, said this across the table and told this to the Chassid. So the question that I have on the story is that an issue of embarrassing this man in public? That's one of the things that, I think would be an automatic question that one would have on this story. And I guess that would be something to, think about. On the one hand, you could say, well, I guess they were all friendly Chassidim. Maybe they were, number one, maybe, among friends, among close friends, I guess maybe they didn't really, it wasn't as painful. They sort of understood each other. Another thought is that maybe everyone has, everyone every so often their mind is on the meal. So once in a while you're hungry, you think about the meal. So you can't really expect someone to be perfect. So it's not the most embarrassing thing if it's something that's expected. But the message of the story, of course, is that our mind should not be on the meal, should be on the spiritual experience. And whenever we sit down to a Shabbos meal, it shouldn't be for the physical enjoyment of the meal, but we should concentrate on the Shabbos experience, which includes a festive meal, but not just in the physical, not just in the physical food. So I think that's an important message. I think it also shows that a tzaddik sees what's in the mind of other people. And I think that of course is probably a major part of the story. Yes, David.
I have two things to say, and I hope I remember the second one by the time I finish the first one. So the first one was, when I see a Chassidic story, I start from the premise that the Rebbe must be doing something right, and the Chassid has to adjust his story to fit what the Rebbe is doing and somehow explain that the Rebbe must be doing something right. It's the Chassid's perception that looks like a negative thing. And the other thing I was going to say was that the way that the Rebbe embarrassed this Chassid is enough that look at all the Chassidim and all the people that heard the story and learned a lesson about acting in a more holy way when a person's eating as opposed to thinking about the food. Look at all the thousands and thousands of people that have heard that story. So if somebody said to you, you know what, the rabbi's going to say something embarrassing to you in front of a group of 25 people, but that might benefit thousands and thousands of people that might hear that story and learn a lesson.
Okay, that's a good point. And you have to, I think, preface that by saying that Chassidim are ones that would enjoy being embarrassed if it was to the benefit of the Jewish people or to the benefit of many, many people, because, not everyone maybe would be on that level, but I would hope that Chassidim would be on that level, that, that would be happy to be embarrassed, a small embarrassment for the benefit of so many people. I think that would be a good preface to that explanation. I think that's very well said, and I think you got a good point there. Very good.
Rabbi?
Yes.
It brings to mind, however, the concept which has sort of been drummed into me, especially in the Middle East, Al Tobin Panei Haver Chaver Rabim, don't whiten your companion's face in front of many people. But I guess this is a special case because, as you say, the Rebbe is using this to give over a lesson. So I suppose it had to be understood in that context.
You know, it's you're sort of, I don't know if it's the sound somehow. I'm not sure. Are you asking a question or did you say a statement? It was like
My
breaking.
first question was how that relates. I mean, to the concept that, you know, al talpin panei haver chabarabim, don't whiten your companion's face in amongst many people. In other words, don't embarrass him. Don't make the blood drain from his face in embarrassment. But at the same time, I'm supposing, based on what David said also, that in this context of the Chassidim, that it should be taken as a lesson that the Rebbe was teaching there at that tish.
Right. Okay. So you're asking my question and you're saying, David, you're saying you like David's answer.
Yes.
Okay. We vote. You got to vote, David. Okay. Okay.
Rabbi.
Anyone else?
Yeah, it's Moshe.
Moshe.
Yeah, you know, there's so many components to a Shabbos meal. You know, the people that come in, the family comes in with their guests. You know, and you say kiddush. You know, and there's the smirot and nigunim. So many things that are associated, and then even at the end, you know, everybody benches. You know, there's so many components, you know, to a Shabbos meal that you would really wonder why somebody would just be just interested in a shtickle of flesh, you know, that's on the table there, you know, and that's it. You know what I mean? I would think that, you know, they would want to get involved, you know, and not think about, you know, just the food. You know what I'm saying? There's so many parts to a Shabbos meal. You know what I'm saying? That makes it much more enticing. You know what I'm saying? That's how I feel. You know, I don't know how anybody else feels, but just to look at a piece of meat on the table and you know, it just doesn't seem.
You're a holy man. I don't know. I sometimes think about the meat on the table.
Well, I mean,
if I'm hungry,
you know, there's a lot of you know, involvement, you know, in a Shabbos meal, you know, if it's carried out in the proper way. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people don't, you know, they're just interested in the food. If they're regular guests, you know, they just come there, they enjoy the food, but you know, there's a lot more to it, you know, than just that. You know, I mean, you know,
okay, all right. Well, I hope we can all live up to that, you know, to that the way you are, Moshe. That's Hashem. Yes, Robert.
I've been reading up, and this was one I like about the Rabbi of Kobrin, and the title is "Bitter, Not Bad." The Rabbi of Kobrin taught, when a man suffers, he ought not say, "That's bad, that's bad." Nothing that God imposes on man is bad, but it is all right to say, "That's bitter." For among medicines, there are some that are made with bitter herbs.
Oh.
Okay, so, you know, so for me, that means, you know, it's not easy to do the right thing and to be with Hashem. So it's not bad, but it's a medicine that you also have to understand sort of what you have to go through for something because of it being good or destiny that you experience.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I you know, I don't know if that answers the question of someone else causing someone embarrassment, but it sort of allows the person to understand why they had to go through the embarrassment.
Whatever the experience, well, I guess within the context of your experience, you know, not that, you know, if you're dedicated to a relationship with God and something happens, it's not bad, but obviously there's something bitter that's part of that relationship, but it's, again, it's a medicine. It allows you to put it within a context and not be negative. You know, you have to, you know, it's schwer, but you also have to have the strength to be able to overcome it.
Right. Well, that, you know, that what you're saying is very important, because you see, embarrassing someone, and it happens all the time, sometimes by mistake, we sometimes embarrass someone. Sometimes it even happens in public. And when a person gets embarrassed, it's one of the worst feelings. Depending on how much they think about themselves, it sometimes could linger inside their feelings for years, decades.
It stings. It stings. It hurts
Stings,
you.
and it stays there. The sting
Right.
sometimes stays, and sometimes people bear grudges for years. It could, and all because of one embarrassment. And it's important to, for people to learn from a young age to try to overcome embarrassment, because it's a very dangerous. It's very dangerous to, if a person doesn't know how to like overcome it and
Right.
move forward.
It festers. It festers.
Yeah, and it really is unhealthy.
Right. You have to reconcile it and go on.
Right.
I think the Torah puts a very strong opinion. This says that, well, ripples up on that if you embarrass somebody in public and it brings blood to their face, equivalent if you murdered them.
Right. Correct.
And
Correct.
that's how bad it is,
Right. It's a terrible, terrible thing. But on the other hand, if a person has it done to them, we do expect them to forgive. That's also part of the Torah, that you're supposed to forgive. Someone asks forgiveness, you're supposed to forgive. You're not supposed to bear a grudge. And so, it's extremely painful, but at the same time, the Torah expects people to forgive and be able to move forward, and still to have Avas Yisrael even after that. So it's something people have to work on, and if you think of it as a medicine, makes it a little easier. Thank you, Robert and Avraham. Okay, right. So the next story is along the same lines. Is a story with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I must say it's not the common. I won't say this is the common story you'll find with the Rebbe, but there is a story on these lines, and that is along these lines that there was a Lubavitch family by the name of the Bucket family, and they had a neighbor. Wasn't Lubavitch, but he had 6 children, and he was trying to marry off a daughter, and he didn't have money. And he went around collecting money for different Chassidic rebbes and rabbis and people and neighbors, whatever. Anyway, for some reason, he got it in his mind that if he told people he has 6 kids and he's marrying off a child, they're not going to really take it so seriously because everyone in the Jewish community has 6 kids. So he decided he'll say that he has 10 kids. You have 10 kids, it's more of a, it sounds a little more, struggle, and maybe people would have more mercy. So he basically, told everyone that he has 10 kids and he's marrying off a daughter, he needs money for the wedding and so on. So anyway, he came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and he had an audience with the Rebbe. So the Rebbe told him, let me daven for all of your children. Please give me all of their names. And I'm not sure if he gave the first 6 and then he got stuck because he didn't know the name of the other 4 because there weren't another 4 children, or if he didn't even start to give the names. He just stayed quiet and he didn't give any of the names. But basically the Rebbe asked him a second time, so what are the names? And he stopped again. He just didn't say anything. And so the Rebbe asked him a third time. When the Rebbe asked him a third time the name of his kids, he just ran out. He ran out of the Rebbe's office and just ran away. So the Rebbe's secretary called the family that that knew the neighbors, because they were Lubavitch family, and the Rebbe's secretary asked them, like, what's the story? So it turned out that became revealed that that there was only 6 kids, and they this man was lying that he had 10 kids, and so the Rebbe's secretary had called, had a member from the Bucket family come by, and he told him that it gave him an envelope and said, this is for your neighbor. And also make sure to tell him that truth is important, but giving money towards a wedding is also important. And that's the story. So here you have another story of obviously the Rebbe knew that this man didn't have 10 kids. And when he was asking him for the names, it was sort of like a subtle way of rebuking him. And here you have, in a certain sense, it's rebuke in a nice way, and ultimately the Rebbe, of course, helped him, but at the same time, he rebuked him as well. And I think this is I think it gives us a little understanding of the obligation a tzaddik has to, at times, rebuke someone, and at times compliment them. And sometimes someone needs a little rebuke, even though we always think of we often think of tzaddikim as they never said anything negative to anyone, but at times someone needs to hear something more serious, especially in this way. It was very low key. Just simply ask him, okay, let me pray for your children, and it woke him up. How, I guess, the fact that he should be more careful, to be honest. Okay, any thoughts on this story?
I think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a great diplomat.
Okay. Okay, we're going to do another story also along these lines, and the story goes. The story goes like this. This is a story of Reb Chaim of Tzanz. Reb Chaim of Tzanz used to provide and help a lot of poor people when it came to marrying off children. Helped a lot of orphans get married, and helping people with basic necessities, and clothing, food, and so on. And so Reb Chaim of Tzanz, he would make sure to treat people as if they were his own children. He would really care for them. Anyway, it happened that his son, Rabbi Yechezkel, was Rabbi Chaim of Tzanz's son. Rabbi Yechezkel was involved in a discussion with another rabbi, and someone came in, and one of the local teachers or principals in the local school came in, and Reb Chaim greeted him, and he said, "What's with your daughter? Is she getting married? Any news?" And he said, "No, I don't have any money for the shtreimel, and for the I don't have money to pay for these for the talis, the shtreimel, for the chassan. I don't have funds, so so we can't make the wedding. My future son-in-law, I have to buy him these items." So the son, Rabbi Chezkel, he quickly said, "Father, I just saw this man in the store buying the shtreimel and the talis. I was just there in the store." And of course, this teacher, this principal, he left the house quite fast and was quite embarrassed, because he basically said something that was not true to the Rebbe, and So Reb Chaim of Tzanz rebuked his son. He said, how could you have said that to this man in public? Who knows? Maybe he took it on loan. Maybe the store gave him credit. You can't disgrace. However, whatever the story is, even if he lied, you don't want to embarrass him in public. And maybe he really needs the money for other things, and he didn't want to say that his wife doesn't have clothing, or something else that's maybe embarrassing. So he had to, he said the shtreimel and the talis, but really it's for for something else that's maybe embarrassing to mention, and therefore he said that. So you have to be very careful. You shamed him in public. How are you going to answer the heavenly court? What are you going to tell them? So Rabbi Yechezkel ran to try to ask this man forgiveness, and he refused. And they finally returned to Reb Chaim of Tzanz, hoping that Rabbi Chaim of Tzanz would, somehow convince this teacher to forgive him, to forgive Rabbi Yechezkel for embarrassing him. And the man refused. He said, I can't forgive, it's so painful. And so finally, Reb Chaim of Tzanz says, that Reb Yechezkel should pay not only for the shtreimel and the talis, but for all the other expenses that are necessary for the wedding. And then, and if he does that, will you then forgive him? And the teacher said, yes, then I'll forgive him. And sure enough, this Rabbi Yechezkel had to cough up the money, probably had to work and come up with the money to be able to pay for this wedding, that help out this man. So that's the story. So I think one of the messages from the story, of course, is on a simple level, is how important it is to be careful. Even if someone's lying, you don't want to embarrass them publicly. And even if it looks like they're stealing and they're tricking people, you have to first do your research. Because let's say that this man really did not buy those items. He ended up, or he borrowed money to buy those items. It could be he borrowed from someone else. He still got to pay that other person back. So he might have bought them, but he didn't really buy them. He doesn't really own them. He owes the money on them. And so now you embarrassed him and you made him not trustworthy. All his business might go downhill now. You could ruin him for life, because people aren't going to trust him. They're not going to want to do business with him. So you always have to be careful the long-term effects of, even though you're right and he lied, but his lie was not necessarily a full-fledged lie. So it could be that it wasn't a lie at all. I mean, he didn't really own these items. Or let's say he lied and it was really he needed clothing, for his wife, and it's embarrassing to say that his wife doesn't have clothing. She can't even go out. She has nothing to wear. Clothing is ripped, and in those days people used to have one garment, and that garment went. It was like you're stuck at home, and so so it could and he was embarrassed. So he just said that he needs money for the chassa, and really he needs money for his wife's garment, but he said he needs money for the groom. So even if he lied, it's not like a full-fledged lie. It was just, it's a balance. I need money for this. I have that, but I don't have this. It's not. He didn't mean to fully lie, and at the same time, you're going to embarrass him. You're really ruining the potential for him, for his future life. You could be ruining his life. I always say that, you know, you have to be careful because you might be stuck giving him charity later because you ruined his business. So in the end, you lose out because, you know, you might think you caught a thief, but in the end, you know, he doesn't have money and he lives in your community. When they go collecting for him to help him out, they're going to be collecting from you as well. So, and it's all your fault. So you have to be very careful to do your research. I'm not saying that if someone is really a crook that you should give them money, but to go and embarrass them before you know fully the full story and why they're doing that, you know, you have to really do good research. I remember once it was an Israeli man that was coming to North Miami Beach collecting money over here, and he claimed he had, you know, a few hundred families that he provides food for. And I called Israel to find out if it's true that this man, and I called someone in that city. So he told me, listen, this man has 12 children. He doesn't have a job. He's eligible for charity. And he's lying to you that he gives food to 200 people. He doesn't, but he is eligible for charity. He's embarrassed to tell you that he's collecting for his family and for his own needs. So he tells you that he supports 200 people. But whatever you give him is charity. That's what the rabbi of the community told me. So, you know, you think about it, is he a crook? You know, is he a liar? You know, there's a certain level of embarrassment that, you know, people are you know, going to bend the truth so that they don't have to go through. And the point is that we shouldn't look at these people as evil. We shouldn't look at them as crooks. They're simply in a bad situation, and they are eligible for charity. And, you know, we have to give them a little slack and let them be the way, you know, so that they don't be embarrassed. Part of our mitzvah of letting them not be embarrassed, giving them their respect, their self-dignity, by not confronting them about their lie. So I think that's, you know, that's an interesting scenario, because I remember there was a person in Miami Beach, a friend of mine was telling me, a friend of mine who had just become religious. So he was telling me about this guy who collects money, and he's basically a fraud. You know, he collects for some. He said, you know, the guy is up to, you know, he's not really legitimate. Anyway, turns out they were at some event, and this guy walked in, and so the community made a plate for him. People were so. My friend who had just become religious, he was like shocked. He said, "Didn't we all hear the rumor that the guy's a crook? You know, he's a Jewish man. He's lying to people that he needs money or whatever. And you go and make a." He couldn't understand. He was shocked. He says, "What? They're getting a plate and handing him a plate of food. This is the crook. We just found out. I mean, this is, you know, public knowledge." So he asked someone. So the guy said, "Yeah, he's a crook. But just because he's a crook, you know, he's Jewish. We gotta give him, you know, came to the event. We gotta give him a plate. You know, we don't have to embarrass him." So, of course, there's, you know, it deserves a little, you know, you have to know how to go about not feeding into someone's wickedness and, you know, and evil, but at the same time, you have to be very careful. It's a very delicate, fragile area. On the one hand, the guy's a liar. On the other hand, not to embarrass someone, especially in public, and how to go about, rebuking him. It has to be done with much more sensitivity. Okay, any thoughts on these?
Yes, Rabbi. I recall a story where it did involve embarrassment, but it was an ill feeling between a person who came to an event. I think it was a wedding, and because of the ill feeling between, I guess, the host and the person, he was thrown out, and it was so embarrassing that it contributed to the downfall of the temple.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I don't have all the details the way I should, but
No, it's good. That's correct. It's you got the story correct. It's true. That's a story about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Yep, from Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That's the story.
oh
of
yes,
Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That's right. Okay. Yes, David.
Yeah, I don't want to judge too harshly, but I'm thinking if a person is collecting for himself and his family, and he expands that to I'm collecting for 200 people, his basic aim is to get a lot more money than a person giving him for 10 children. If a person's giving him for 10 children, I'd give $5, $10. A guy's collecting for 200, I would feel embarrassed to give $10. I would give $20. And if somebody can afford it more, they would be talking in hundreds or thousands. Okay, a guy has a family, I'll give him $100. You're collecting for 200 families, I'll give you $1,000. So by doing that, I think he's disenfranchising other people that are collecting tzedakah for real, because they're not going to get the amount of tzedakah that would have been given to them, because this guy's exaggerating his need he's going from 10 children to 200 families.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, David. I do think that the rabbi of his community has an obligation to rebuke him in private, and and explain to him what you said. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't give him anything because he's lying. And I think that's the main point. And to spread the word that he really needs money, but doesn't have 200 people. Maybe that would be okay. To spread the word. People should know, what the real truth is, but at the same time, not to look at him as a crook, because he might, he's doing it to hide his embarrassment. Maybe he's also doing it to see if he can get bigger donations, but it's ultimately for tzedakah, so it's not, he's not a crook in the way we see, when we talk about crooks. Not exactly do we refer to this type of person, but yes, it's wrong. It's wrong, and the someone should rebuke him, definitely, but in private and sensitivity. Okay.
If you took a different angle from this, and the guy's asking for $200, and you go and check, and he said he doesn't need it or whatever, or and you pull him aside and you say, look, you need $200, I'll give you it. But he said, if you had been honest with me in the first place, I'd have given you $500. So is that kind of like a way of rebuking him, but realize he made a mistake?
Right. Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds like a good plan. I'll send him your way if he comes back. All right, very good. Okay, well, I guess it's 4 o'clock. Let's, I guess we'll conclude here. Any last thoughts? Okay, have a wonderful day.